Welcome friends, in this video I'm going to show you how to add a trigger, and the trigger will run after we insert a record into the employees table. And the purpose of the trigger will be to generate some new records for the new employees. So remember, so far we are, in terms of the web page at this stage, we have this movable item, and of course we can click new and we can add a new first name and a last name. Remember that the ID is then automatically generated. So what we want to do is enter some information through the web page and then have, for example, in a sales table, which we worked with heavily in the last lessons, what we want to do is add some sales records for this first name and last name that we stick in here. And I will do that by using a trigger. Okay, so let's take a look at what I mean here. Let me cancel that. And again, open up a query window in the editor. Remember, we're going to make a trigger, and because we're going to be updating the sales table, think about that. How do we go about this? Take a look. I will say as follows: create and then trigger. Okay, update sales table. So the purpose of the trigger is clear. And this will be created, think about on which table. We have on the user interface, right, through that little details view, access to the employees table. When you insert a record, it goes into the employees table. So when you make your trigger, take a look. I'm going to say here on and then employees table after insert. So what this is saying essentially in simple English is make sure that when you update the sales table here like that, after an insert is performed on the employees table. So we interact with the interface, we insert a record into the employees table. As a result of that, we want to update the sales table. So now take a look at the specifics here. I will say the following as, and then I will say the following. Declare. Now the question is, how do we make these sales records? Well, remember back to the last video, we had the heart of the program was like the inner while loop where we did an insert into and then a sales table. So we're going to reuse that here. That part has to be the same, right? Because we are generating records also. So here I take a look. I'm going to now type declare and I'm going to say add emp ID. I'm going to get the employee ID. And I want the last employee ID selected from the employees table. So to do that, I will say int. Remember, that simply means integer data type. And you can do the following. You can type equals. And then to get the last employee ID from the employees table, the one that has, for example, just been inserted through the web page, you can type select. And then you're going to say max emp ID. And then from employees table. Now what is this saying? Remember, this here is a basic query that gets the maximum employee ID from the employees table, and then that is saved over to this add emp ID variable. And this works perfectly well. You can have a query used to initialize a variable like this. The data type is integer. So we're going to select basically the last or the most recently added employee ID in the employees table. And then once you have it, you can use that to make records to save in the sales table. So take a look. I will say the following. Declare at counter. Integer say equals 0 this time. I think in the previous lesson I wrote, when I did the counter bit, equals 1. So this time I'm writing 0. And again, so if you have a 1 here and you use it with get date, you will say get date plus 1. That means tomorrow. Get date plus 0 means today. Okay? I don't think I explained that to the best possible clarity in the previous video. So I'm going to fix that here. I'm going to take a look. I'm going to say while, and I will say add counter is less than or equal 10. Of course, this isn't a crucial piece of information, whether you're starting your records from today or tomorrow. It's just an academic example anyway. So I will say while at counter is less than or equal to 10. And I'm going to say begin. And the rest of this code is pretty much the same as in the last video. So I'll say insert. And then into sales table, then you make the list of fields. So emp ID, date sold, month only, and then amount. And then you type the values bit. And then you say add emp ID, comma, next field. So that's going to be now get date plus add counter. So remember, in our particular case, counter begins at 0 as you see here. Okay, so this will first be get date plus 0. In other words, just get date. today's date. It should begin with today's date. If you have the counter set to 1, then it begins at get date, which is today, plus 1 more. So that would be tomorrow. So get date plus add counter. Next stage in the process, let's take a look. I'm going to say, again, the same as before, so date name. I want the data to be consistent, so date name and then month, get date, and then plus add counter. And lastly, we had the rand times 10,000 to generate a random sales amount. So this part is exactly the same as in the last one. Remember, we got to close the while. So at the end, put end. And lastly, also remember that because there is a while loop, we need to advance the counter by 1 on every turn of the loop. So to do that, I'll type set at counter equal to at counter plus 1, as you see there. All right, so what we want to do now is save the trigger. So just highlight all of this and then hit execute. Make sure on the bottom in the messages, you'll see something like commands completed successfully. That's good. All right, in Object Explorer on the left side, I go to the table and refresh it. Make sure that you can see this trigger saved here properly. All right, let me go into, remember this is acting on the employees table. Go into the employees table, expand that node, go to the triggers, and notice that it says update sales table. So remember, we have the user interface element. You interact with it. That means you pass values into the employees table. When that occurs, as a result of that, after the insert, the sales table is automatically updated with some fake sales records. Okay? I'm doing it this way just to show you that it's possible, that's all. And also because I wanted to illustrate how you can, for example, set a variable like this with a query. All right, let me collapse this. And let's give this baby a run. So, how do we test this to be sure that it's actually working? Well, first of all, let's go to the sales table for a second. We want to take a look at what is inside. So I will say select star from sales table. We want to do that because we want to make sure once we run this trigger from the web page that everything is consistent. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom. And right now, as you can see here, I've got 31 records. The last employee ID is 5. And remember, when we interact with the details view, because of the way we created the employees table, the ID field is auto-incremented, correct? It's an identity. So whatever is there by default, right? The system just sticks in the value. We don't have to keep track of it manually. That would be very messy. All right, so this is what we are going to do next. Take a look. Go into the web page. You're going to open Visual Studio and run the project again, assuming you're at this point as I am. And now take a look. I'm going to hit New. All right, I'm going to input a name. I'm going to say, for example, here, Tom Adamski, and then I will say Insert. And we want to see, remember, that this actually generates and appends new records to the sales table. So hit Insert. Okay, hit on 4 here. And remember that in my case, this gets an employee ID of 1007. That's fine. So I've been experimenting a lot. And now, minimize this for a second. And what you want to do is go into the sales table. And you should see updated information in the sales table, correct? So select star from sales table, hit execute. Go to the bottom, and let's see. And we have that, you see? The data that corresponds to this person's sales, for example, has been added there. Of course, the next question might be, how do you get rid of this? For example, if on a web page, I now go over, I select my record, and I click delete, how do I remove the sales information that corresponds to this record? So that I will do in the next lesson. I just want to make sure you can see all the code here from top to bottom. Let me zoom out just a tiny bit. Let's see. Okay, that's everything that I've typed. And that is it. I'll see you in the next one.